Today is June 2nd, 2009. I am Andrea Mott. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Napoleon, North Dakota. Can you please state your full name, including maiden name?
Okay. Laura Schulz, Hellmuth.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Kintyre, North Dakota, on a farm. There was a midwife, and that was August the 7th, 1919.
Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
Not really.
You mentioned a midwife was present. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it was one of the neighbors who delivered the babies, around the area. And she would come whenever the mother would be in labor, and she would stay there. And I remember her when the twins were born. That was one of the last children that my mother had. It was pretty hectic. We had to boil water and keep out of the way. And of course, that was really an interesting, unusual story that day. Yeah. So there were twins born. So, yeah.
And how many siblings do you have?
Well, altogether there was 11 of us. One stepbrother and one stepsister.
And the twins were where in the...
Well, they were the last ones born to be born. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see, I was born in 1919, and then Gertie and Gerald were born 7 years after that. So.
Can you please share some of your earliest memories with us?
Like what? When
What
growing.
What is the earliest thing you remember?
We were talking about that last night. I think probably one of the earliest ones would have been maybe the birth of those twins. That was a little traumatic. And just growing up generally with our whole family, I mean, we had very good memories. We played harmonicas and also had barn dances, and we worked very hard helping our parents. And one of the memories I really have, I put in the Quacentennial history book, was when we came home from school, we would see a wagon parked. And we just knew what was going to happen, because that was the day the potatoes had to be dug and the carrots had to be dug. And of course we had to do all of that. And when we dig them, we would sort them, some for seed and some for eating. And then we'd have to carry them down the basement and also do the carrots. We just hated to see that wagon there. We knew what was happening. That was an all-afternoon job. So, I mean, that was our livelihood for the whole winter, the potatoes and the carrots and the squash and the turnips and cabbage and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Did you do a lot of chores around the farm as a child?
I didn't do as many chores as I was sickly. I didn't do as many chores. I usually helped my mother, but I did do a lot of milking by hand.
And what kind of activities would you help your mother with?
Well, mostly housework, and the baking, and taking care of the twins. I took care of one twin, and my sister, Marion, took care of the other one. And the one twin was very ill when he was born, so of course he needed a lot of attention. So we would rock them to sleep, and yeah, that was one of the big activities. And then, of course, the little boy didn't live very long because he was born with sores in his mouth. And so, let's see, he was born in October, and then in November he passed away. So, yeah. So I'm sure that was helpful for my mother. So, yeah.
Did you ever help care for your family's garden?
Oh, sure we did. That was the weeding part. Even the seeding we had to do, and the harvesting. And when it was time for the canning, we'd have to pick the peas, and we'd sit in the shade, and we would shell peas all morning, so we'd get about a canner full of peas. You know what a canner is, don't you? Where they used to can big jars, quart jars. So by the time we had all that done, it was probably after late afternoon. So, but we'd have fun. We'd read comics to each other, and my mother would come every day. Have you got them all done now? I need so many, So we did. By the time she was ready to can them, we had enough for, I guess, 7 quarts. That's what went into that big canner, was 7 quarts. Yeah.
Did your brothers and sisters help around the house or care for the garden as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we all had chores to do. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you elaborate on some of those chores?
Well, when we come home from school, That was, of course, the potatoes. And then another one was bringing in the clothes off of the line. There were no dryers in those days, and my mother would wash, and she'd hang out the clothes in the morning. And then by the time we got home from school, they were frozen. So, but all of the moisture was out of them by that time, see? So then we would bring them in, and as we brought them in, we had a sort of like a game. We'd take the men's overalls and their underwear, and we'd kind of put them on our feet, and we'd walk in the house, you know. Oh, my mother was so upset. She said, "You got him dirty, you're getting him dirty." We kind of made a game out of things like that. It was work, but it was still a game. That's the fun part of having a big family, you know.
So what kind of games would you play with your siblings?
Oh, we played baseball and ante-over, where you throw the ball over the pump, pull away, ice skating, skiing down the hills. My brother would make skis out of wood, and they would put them in boiling water overnight to kind of form, you know, the shape of a ski going up like that, and they have a point on that. And by morning, then they would tie them for a day so they would stay, and then we would strap them on our feet and go down the hills.
Is that a regular winter activity?
Yeah, oh yeah, that and the skating, ice skating.
Which one did you prefer?
Well, I think I liked the tobogganing. We would have a tobogganing where we would sit and someone would be pulling us with a horse, yeah.
How often were you able to do those?
Well, maybe 2 months or so in the winter months, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was a typical winter like in your family's household?
Some were pretty bad. The blizzards were so bad that my father would tie a rope to the door of the kitchen leading up to the barn, so when we would do our chores, we would not get lost. We'd have to hang onto the rope. I mean, yeah. And so then, of course, the milking was really a tedious job. I had the job of cleaning the milk house and the separator. You know what a separator is?
Oh, can you describe it?
Well, a separator is a machine that the milk goes through, and then the cream comes out of one spout and the milk comes out of the other one, see? And then they're little discs. Oh, I think maybe 30, 40 little discs that all had to be separated and had to be cleaned, because that's where the debris and the stuff would end up. And so washing the separator was a big job. That was my job.
You've always had that job?
That was my job for many years, yep. Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned talking about the separator and how that was always your job.
Yeah.
Were there differences between some of the winter chores and summer chores that you did?
Well, no, there was milking all the year round, you see. And then the cream would be put in one container, and the milk would be in the other. That milk had no cream on it, see, so that was used for the pigs and whoever drank milk, the cats, and then we would drink that milk too, but we would always had cream at the house, see. And then the cream, my mother and dad would sell it, and they would get a little paycheck, and that would be for the groceries, see. And then she would make cottage cheese out of the skim milk. Actually, that was skim milk because there was no cream in there, see. Cottage cheese she would make, and we drank a lot of hot chocolate. We'd come home from school and she'd have the hot chocolate on the stove before we did our chores. So we had all the milk we needed, see, yeah.
And can you describe the process she used to make cottage cheese?
Well, it would be set on the back of the stove until it got kind of like separated. The water would go to the bottom, and then the rest of the milk would be kind of floating up on top. And that had to be sitting there for a couple days, I guess. And then she would just drain it and then press out all the water, and there was cottage cheese. Yeah. And if we wanted it to be really special, she would add some onions from the garden, or maybe some extra cream, or yeah. So.
Well, what kind of crops or fields did your family have?
Well, my father raised wheat, flax, and corn. And let's see, flax and corn. Yeah, and let's see. That was about it in those days. Oh, barley, also barley, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then when that was harvesting time, after it was threshed, we'd have a threshing machine come in and would be thrashing all the grains. And then my father would take a load of grain into the town, called the town of Tembe. It was a very small town, maybe about 15 miles from where we lived. And there was a mill there. And that would be milled. He would have that ground into flour and bring it home, and then that would be the flour for the winter.
How much flour would your family usually use?
Oh, an awful lot, because my mother would bake bread every other day. I don't know, just sacks of flour, I guess, you know. And then when that was gone, then he'd take another load of wheat into town, and maybe he'd take rye, because we liked rye flour, rye bread, yeah. And then corn, he would grind the corn. He had a corn grinder, he would grind that, and then my mother would make cornbread and Johnny cakes and things like that, you know.
And what other kinds of food would your mother make?
Well, we had sauerkraut. That would be many, many heads of cabbage that were brought in, and that would be put on a shredder and put in a big 20-gallon crock and put some salt on there and then weigh it down with a brick and wood, and then in a couple, maybe say 2-3 weeks, that would turn into sauerkraut. So, and then of course we had the canned peas and do also carrots, but carrots usually kept pretty good in the root cellar, and the potatoes and the squash and the pumpkins, they all kept pretty good in the cool root cellar. It was just a sort of like a dugout thing, you know, that on the side in the basement that kept the vegetables nice and cool, yeah. And then if the chickens were laying really, really good before winter start, my mother would take them and put them in the granary where the wheat was. We didn't have the big elevators like they have now. It was just called the granary. And she would hide them. She wouldn't hide them. She'd stick them down below the grain, and that way they kept for the winter. They wouldn't freeze, see. That was how she kept the eggs.
Do you know how many she would usually end up keeping?
It all depended on how good the chickens were laying. Maybe dozens of them, you know. So then a lot of times we'd go out and get the eggs, and they would be frozen, but then we still would use them, see. You know, our son called me from California not long ago, and he said, "Mom, tell me what you did during the Depression." And I said, you know, we just didn't do anything different. We were so poor, it was a depression all the time. Because we were self-sufficient, see. We were self-sufficient. My mother would make clothes. We had some very nice neighbors who would bring over their old coats and things, and my mom would make ski pants and mittens and hats and things, made all of our clothes. So the only thing we had to do was buy shoes and things like that.
Now, would she cook anything different during that time than she would in better years?
Well, no. Well, see, we had everything we needed, see. We had our meat, we had our milk, we had eggs, we had all the vegetables. All we needed to actually do was peanut butter once in a while, and syrup, and sugar, and rice. Really, that was about all. And then, of course, postum. I don't know if you know what postum is. It's made out of a wheat. It's a drink that we used, and it tastes a little bit like coffee, and it was called postum. And for a long time, we were able to purchase it, but now we can't get it anymore. I think they discontinued it. Yeah, and then coffee, of course, they'd have to buy coffee, and cocoa. Otherwise, we were pretty self-sufficient.
How often would you go to town to get these
Just
things?
maybe once a week to take the cream in, and the eggs. The eggs also would be sold at the markets, you know, in trade for groceries, see. Mm-hmm.
Now, were there any special occasions that you would go to town for?
Well, yes, like 4th of July, and then sometimes a Chautauqua would come in from Chicago, and that was sort of like a carnival, and we always thought that was fun.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Well, they would have games and booths, and just like they have now, just like the carnivals are now, you know, but on a smaller scale, of course, you know.
Where would they have those?
They would have them on the street, in Kintyre, which was a very small town. Very small town. It had a post office and 2 markets and a barber shop, a bank, and a restaurant. It was very small. It was very small. And right now there's nothing there. It's been abandoned. There's only a post office there now. So, yeah.
Now, you mentioned the 4th of July a little bit. I'd like to go back to that.
Yeah.
What did your family do for the 4th of July?
Well, there'd be firecrackers, and there would be games, and people would have picnics and just get together. And usually people would make ice cream and have homemade ice cream. And you'll laugh when I tell you, there were no refrigerators. So you know where we would get the ice from? From the straw pile in the barn, there would be frozen ice, and that would be unlifted open, and we would get that ice, and then that we would put in our ice cream maker. It was an old ice cream maker that you had to turn by hand. So that's where the ice came from. We didn't have any refrigerator. We didn't have any ice machine. So, and our foods was kept pretty cool by dropping everything down the well with a bucket, you know, with a string tied to it. And like that was dropped down the well, and that would keep the cream fresh and the butter fresh and cottage cheese and meat and things. That would be in the summertime. And then, of course, the wintertime, you know, things froze. You didn't need a refrigerator. Yeah.
Now, I want to jump back to the picnics. Can you describe a 4th of July picnic?
Yeah, there would be, oh goodness, just a regular picnic out under the trees. I don't remember having any parks or any benches. We would just gather under the tree, and the neighbors would gather, come with us, and have food, and we'd play ball. And
What kind of games?
oh, baseball. Baseball usually, that was our game, yeah.
What about the food? Was there any special food that they would
Well, like but maybe potato salad and probably some canned meat, maybe some canned pork, and ice cream would be made, of course, homemade bread, and it was always good. It was good. And I suppose vegetables. I don't know, we had a lot of vegetables, you know. So.
Did you have a favorite treat?
I imagine ice cream. And then fudge. We were not allowed to use a lot of sugar in our family. And then when our father and mother went to town, we would make fudge. And we'd hurry up and make it and eat it as fast as we could, you know, because we were not allowed to use all that much sugar. And my mother would come home. Oh, she says, this really smells wonderful in here, you know, and she'd smile, and we didn't say anything. Well, we didn't cook anything, because she knew what we did. You know, you can smell fudge when you come in a house, you know, especially from being outside. So that was our treat, making fudge.
How often would you do that?
Well, whenever they went to town, maybe about once a week.
So your siblings all chipped in?
Oh, of course, yeah. We made toffee every now and then, but it wasn't very good. You know, where you pull that, that didn't turn out very good. I don't remember having too much of that, so, yeah.
Now, would your mother make specific dessert dishes that you remember?
Yeah, you know, my mother was illiterate. She couldn't read and write, but her recipes, I still have them, were absolutely wonderful. She beat up the best cakes. Well, she had all the good ingredients. She had sour cream, she had fresh cream, she had fresh eggs and sugar and homemade flour, so no recipe. Oh, yeah, there were always good cakes. And then, of course, Kuchen, you know, that's the German thing that they make with the cream and the eggs and the cinnamon, and we'd have a lot of that. And homemade donuts, that was another thing, because you see, we rendered all of our pork into lard, and that's what we used for cooking and for baking and for making like donuts and fried things. So maybe that's why we all have high cholesterol, huh?
Can you describe the process that she used to make homemade donuts?
Well, it was just like beating up eggs and flour and sugar and cream and dipping them and rolling them out, and you know, we would drop them into the hot fat and get burned once in a while. Yeah, so, but they were always good fresh. So. Yeah, I have some special recipes of my mother. It's called Hellmuth, and to this day my family loves me to make that. It's made with brown pork and onions and garlic, and then layers of potatoes, layers of rice, and layers of sauerkraut. And let's see what else. And then, of course, your beef broth or your chicken broth. And then you cook that all, but you don't stir it, and you just kind of steam it. And then when it's done, then you... So that's called Hellmuth, and that was a favorite one of ours, yeah. because we had potatoes, we had sauerkraut, we had pork, we had everything except rice. So that was a staple that we had often. Yeah.
Are there any other meals that you remember pretty vividly?
Well, I liked it. The meals that when we went to school, every family would donate like baked potatoes, squash, milk to make cocoa. Those are always fun things. It was like hot meals, at the school. And the teacher would put the baked potato on top of the stove, and the milk was put there, and then we'd have hot cocoa, and people would bring homemade bread. Everyone brought, it's like a potluck, We had good meals. We had hot meals in those days. Not every school did that, but our school did.
Now, what kind of school did you go to?
It was a public school, and it was first grade to eighth grade, and there were not too many people, maybe about 15 or 20. And the teacher would stay in the schoolhouse. She would board there and sleep there, or she'd come to families, and live with the families, and so, yeah.
What do you remember the most about school?
The school? Well, I think my most fond memories was my teacher. She was great on declamation contests. Once a year, there in the counties, a number of schools would get together, and there'd be song fests, and there'd be music, and there'd be speeches. And she always had me stay after school, and then she'd put me on the desk. I remember that. Just now, she says, I want you to recite this poem, and I want you to, So we always won first prize in our school, most all the time. And of course, I was for the declamation. That's the declamation. That's what it was called, the declamation contest. So I don't know. I imagine that means declaring what. I don't know. That's what it was called. So.
Now, how often would they do those?
Well, we do that in the spring. Maybe once a year.
What kind of courses did you take?
Well, we had especially penmanship, arithmetic, history, the regular. We had courses about health, just the regular, From first grade on to eighth grade, so we had a variety. As a matter of fact, I think we got a good education because now the younger children could hear what the older ones were reciting and reading, and so I think that was good education. And if there were slow children that couldn't read, then some of us would help them, we'd tutor them, because we would have the time to do that, see. So I did a lot of tutoring. I enjoy that, yeah. Yes.
I want to go back to the declamation contest for a second. Did that start before you were in school then?
I think so. I think it was something that had been set up for years and years, yeah.
Did your siblings ever do that?
Pardon me?
Did your siblings ever participate in the declamation contest?
Who? Excuse me?
Your siblings.
Oh, yes, they did. The whole school did, yeah. There'd be songs that they sang and different things, reciting poems and yeah, it was an outing, actually. We were really, really excited about that. Sometimes we'd go to different schools or go to the county courthouse, And the superintendent would be there, and, he was the one that was overseer of all the schools in that district. Yeah, and we get little blue ribbons, so yeah, it was fun.
I want to move from elementary school to maybe, high school.
Yeah.
What would you do? Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Kintyre. It was I rode my horse to town until it got to the point where it was too cold, and my little horse, I guess, slipped down the ditch and got a kidney infection. So then I moved into town then with about 4 other girls. We stayed in a room, and it was called Room and Board. And we would help take care of the younger children in that family. And we did our own cooking, of course. And we did that. But I only went to Kintyre High School just for a year and a half. Then after that, I took a correspondence courses.
Now, within that year and a half that you did go to school, do you have a fond memory from that time?
Well, yeah, I enjoyed the high school. I really did. We had sports. And we had, it was interesting. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what was so good about it. I liked school. I really liked school, yeah.
Now, did you do tutoring as well when you got to
No.
high school?
No.
Now, onto that correspondence course, how does that work?
Well, I would enroll in a correspondence, and then they would send lessons home to me, and I would have to do them and do a lot of reading. And then there would be tests that I had to take. And of course, my father would just monitor so I didn't cheat. And that would send back to, I don't know where I send them to. I can't remember, some county, I guess, maybe a courthouse. And then the grades would come back, and that would be like credits, you know. So that's how I got through high school. I did have, a year in the Jamestown High School, so. But I never did really get a certificate until I got out to California, and I had several jobs, and so then I just got what do they call that, equivalent of a high school, or GED, you know. So this is what yeah. And then I took some courses in the City College at Santa Monica High School, Santa Monica College, California.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I know I'm going to move subjects just a little bit. I know you grew up with a large family.
Yes.
What are some of your fondest memories of growing up with a large family?
Well, probably like the games and the companionship and, you know, helping out with the younger children. And, you know, there were always plenty of us, you know, to have games.
Can you describe some of those games?
Well, yeah, like I said, baseball and reading. We like to sing. We like to sing and entertain our family. We would sing and entertain our family because I had a brother who played the violin, he played the piano, he played every instrument, and then I, of course, played the harmonica. So we would entertain our family. Yeah. And then in the wintertime, my father and my mother would invite people to come over, and they played cards, and then we would go to the hay mound, and that's a barn that above it where the hay is kept, you know, and there we would have barn dances there. See?
Can you describe a barn dance?
Yeah. There would be instruments, and people would come, and the whole neighborhood, and we'd have a good time.
What kind of dances would you?
Well, sometimes we did the square dances, and polkas, and waltzes, and whatever, yeah. And I don't know how we learned it, but I guess we did. Just the older ones taught the little ones, you know, and so, yeah.
When did you start going to barn dances? At
Oh,
age?
well, maybe about 10 or 12 or something like that. We were not allowed to go to public dances. That was one of the things our parents would not allow us to do. If we had to do, we'd have to sneak, because that was a no-no, see. They weren't that religious, but my father didn't think that dances was a popular thing, morals for young girls to do, you know, so, yeah.
Who would your family invite to these barn dances?
Well, the neighbors. They would take turns, you know, to go to people's, yeah.
How long would it take to set up for a barn dance?
Oh, not very long. Our folks would start playing cards, and we would run up to the hay mound and get our instruments, and it didn't take us very long. And clear the hay away so you'd have a place to dance, you know.
Did you have a specific outfit that you would wear for these?
No, I don't think so. It was the winter time. I'm sure we wore heavy clothes till we got into the barn. I'm not sure. I can't remember what we wore. So nothing specific, no.
Did you ever go to any of those dances that weren't those barn dances?
Well, we did occasionally. Okay.
Can you describe those a little?
Well, they were in a hall, and then you had to pay to get in, see? And there was an orchestra there. And you would sit around benches, and then the young men would come up and ask for dances, and you'd dance with them, and then you'd sit down and wait for another one, and so, yeah. But it was sort of like a bench around the whole area. Usually it was a city hall or a big building, you know, yeah. They were chaperoned, of course, you know, yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about your family. Did you have Were your grandparents, did they live in the area?
I never knew my grandparents, so I wasn't that lucky. My father left Germany. He was sort of like a stowaway on a ship and would never speak about his family because he said they're still back in Germany and Russia. He said, and there could be repercussions, there could be bad things happening to his family if they found out that he was in America. He said, anytime now, he says, I don't know, he says, I'm always worried. Anytime now I can almost feel somebody coming getting me, see. He ran away from the war. He was a war in Germany, and then the Russian Tsarina, I don't know what it was, who she was. Anyway, she lured the boys over to Russia. She said, you don't have to be in the army. Just come over and show our lazy men how to cook and, how to build fences and how to, grow gardens and build houses. And a lot of them migrated. And then, of course, she was good at her word, but then after she had to be set down, I don't know who it was, but someone took over. I think it was her uncle, and he's the one that said, no, the men all have to go to war. See, that's when the war broke out. And my father didn't want to do that, so he just took off.
How old was he?
He was 20, I think he was 25. So he got up to the ship, and the guard said to him, I don't see you, get going. He said, I could shoot you right now. He said, you are a soldier who was leaving, he said, but I don't see you. He said, so my father got a stowaway on that ship till he got to part of America. So I don't know how he did it, but he did. He couldn't speak a word of English when he got to Ellis Island. So he must have had some money, and he said he'd go to the restaurant and he'd listen to what the people were ordering. And all they ordered, hamburger. So he says, I can never even taste, I don't want any hamburger. That's all he had to eat. Until he got to that point where they send him to where he had a brother in Ashley who was a shoemaker. You always had to have someone you had to go to when you came over, see, from the whole country. So he went to his brother in Ashley, and he was a shoemaker, and he was going to teach my father. So he taught my father how to mend shoes and put soles on and make shoes. But my father and my brother and his brother didn't get along very well. So my father left there and he went and he homesteaded. He built a sod house in Kentare area. I don't know how much land they were able to get. There was a certain amount that you had to build a house on, and you homestead. You got that land free, see? And so that's what he did. And then he went to Ashley and got himself a bride. He's someone there, and then they were married, I think, 7 years, and she died of tuberculosis, and then, of course, he couldn't take care of the daughter, and so someone said, well, there's another young lady down in Ashley that has a boy, and go down and see if she could be your bride. Sure enough, my mother, can you imagine that? Went back with him to Kentare to the sod house that he had built with her son, who was 7 years old. And then later on, he built a house, and they kept that sod house for a chicken house. So my mother was pretty brave, wasn't she? Could you imagine you doing that? Your dad saying, I have a nice man for you?
Did she tell you a lot of stories about that?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us some more about that?
Well, I think, I don't know, she never complained very much. She didn't complain. I suppose she was happy to get out of the situation because she was raising her brother because the mother had died in childbirth, and there was a big family there too. She had 3-4 brothers and sisters, and she was the oldest one, so she was raising those family, helping her father till he got remarried. And when he remarried, she said the stepmother was terrible, she said, so that's all I know. So she was happy to get out of that situation, see? So it was better than living there, and having a stepmother you didn't like and taking care of the children, see?
So she took her son and...
Yeah, and left. Yeah, an old pioneer.
Can you tell us about your mother? What was she like?
Well, my mother she always had rosy cheeks. She was very short. She was shorter than I was. She had the kindest heart, and she was a good mother. And anyone came to the house, they never left without her giving them something. You know, it was always, that was the tradition in those days, yeah. She worked hard. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table. We were all sitting around the table eating dinner, and the next thing you know, she'd be nodding and she'd be asleep because she had worked hard. Can you imagine scrubbing and cleaning and baking and having no electric appliances like we have now? Hanging the clothes out on the line so they freeze to get dry, you know, and then that was hard work. Bringing in water from the well and heating it on the stove. Washing with a washboard. I don't know how she did it, but I can see where she'd fall asleep at the table. She'd be so relaxed, you know. Yeah, she was a very kind woman.
What do you remember the most about your mother?
Well, that she always had food ready for us. I think that was the most important thing. And always make special clothes for us, see? I think that was the most important. My father and mother were not very affectionate. I mean, towards us children, I can't remember them any, you know, like the mothers and the grandparents are now. So maybe that's why I spoil my grandchildren, because we didn't have that at home. She wasn't that strict because she'd always say, just wait till your dad gets home, you know, so... But then by the time Dad got home, you know, I think she'd forgotten all about it, you know. No, she wasn't strict, so.
Now your father, can you describe him a little bit?
He was a very strict man, yeah. He was a very strict man, a very disciplined. We had to be disciplined. Yep. He was too strict, I think. But you can imagine having 11 children and not having enough money to buy a new machinery. It seemed like his machinery always broke down. It seemed like he should never have been a farmer. He wasn't a good farmer. He should have been a shoemaker, but it didn't work out. So, but he was good in planting. He was good in planting and grafting different trees, like different fruits on different trees. He was good on that. And he did do shoemaking. He had one of those. I wish I had one of those. Well, it was a little thing that you have a little shape of a shoe. It was kind of a metal, and it had different sizes, you know. And you'd put your shoe in there, and then he'd put new soles on them. See, that's what he did a lot for the neighbors and for us. He'd cut the soles out of leather. He'd buy leather, and then he'd put them on this shoe. I don't know what it was called, shoe latch, and then he would nail them down with little nails or something, and we had resoled shoes all the time. Yeah.
Was that a treat, or was that just normal?
Well, no, it was normal, otherwise we had to go barefoot, you know. He was very proud. He would not accept any help, like from the county or anything like that. Never. He said, I'll do this on my own, you know, so...
What do you remember the most about him?
Well, at Christmas time it was interesting. It was always a fun time at Christmas time because he would get out the Bible and then he'd read the Christmas story and then we would sing songs and then we would have nuts and candies, just treats, you know, while my mother was preparing the dinner, and that was a special time, yeah. And he always was interested in history.
Laura, we were talking just a little bit ago about, you know, one of the best memories of your father is around Christmas time. Can you elaborate on that?
Let's see, what did I tell you about the Christmas stories? And he was very disciplined. I mean, he of course he'd been in the army, so I suppose maybe that's probably. But he was almost like a general. I tell you, we had to obey. I mean, it was strict orders, you know. No talking at the table. Can you believe that? That's not where a family's conversation would be. We had to be quiet at the table. He was interested in history, always in history. So when I went to school, he'd ask me to read the stories about history because he was, and then he became a naturalized citizen. I think he was here a year and a half in the United States, and he studied, and he became a naturalized citizen. That was a really big opportunity for him. And Oh, let's see, what else? As I said, he wasn't a very good farmer. He should have had a different opportunity. But then, as the boys got older, and then they were able to purchase tractors and things like that, it wasn't so difficult to farm anymore. But just farming with horses, in broken down machinery, and you don't have the money. He was always the last one to get the crops in, or even to harvest. It was hard, yeah.
Now, did your brothers help a lot out in the
Yes.
field?
Oh, yeah.
What kind of chores would they do?
Well, they helped, of course, with the milking and with the harvesting and everything, with the butchering, which was another thing. See, we butchered all of our own, had all of our own meat. I hated it when today is the day we were going to butcher, so you had to have the hot water boiling on the stove, and then it was taken out into barrels, and the pork, the pig, was then lowered. He was dead, of course. He was lowered into there, and then he was pulled out on a pulley. Then they were put on a slab, and he had to scrape that stuff off of that. There's not a fur. I don't know what pigs have, but you had to scrape that all off, see? And that to me was a horrible job, but they helped with all of that.
How often would you?
Well, once a year we'd do that. And then in the fall of the year, my mother raised turkeys. Those also had to be prepared. They had to be, I think we pulled the feathers off of those. We didn't dip them in water. Then they were put in barrels after they were all cleaned, and then they were taken into town, and they were shipped to Minneapolis, and on the train, and then not too much after that, we would get a check, and that would put us through the winter for clothing and also for food. Yeah.
What other kind of meat did your
Well, we had chickens, of course, chickens and eggs. My mother would say, "We're going to have chicken tonight. Run out and get a chicken." So you had to go out there and catch a chicken with a hook and chop his head off and dip it in boiling water, and that was it.
Whose job was that?
Well, I did a lot of that. Yeah.
Did you mind it?
Well, no, that was the way we were brought up. Our kids think it's terrible, and I tell them about it. I said, you chop the chicken's head off, and then, of course, the reaction would be the chicken's head would be laying down. The chicken would still be jumping in the ground. I don't know what. I suppose that was just a muscle reaction. So, yeah, they thought that was terrible. As a matter of fact, our son will not eat chicken. They won't eat eggs after he heard all that story. He's a vegetarian. So is the other girl. They won't eat meat. They think that's cruel. But that's the way it is. God, put that on the earth. I tell him for us to eat. So, anyway.
What other kinds of meat did your family raise?
Capons. You know what capons are? My father and I, it's the male rooster, and we would do surgery on it. We were really good at that. On the fourth rib, we would cut open, and we'd take off the little what's it called? Maybe it's called a testicle. I think it is. We just take that off and cut it off and close the rib back up again and put the chicken in the coop overnight. And the next morning we'd get out there. Some of them had so much air in them we had to take a sterilized needle and let the air out, But those capons got so huge. You can still buy them in the store now. They were a male rooster that have been altered in the food, and they grew huge, enormous, Those were called capons. And my father and I, we did that. We did the surgery. I should have been a veterinarian,
How did you feel about that?
Oh, that was good. That was fun for me, yeah. And whenever any stray dogs or any things would come, my dad and I would take care of them. We'd stitch up. One little dog came and I think a coyote must have gotten hold of it. Had the whole end of front of him torn off, so we stitched it up, and he became a good little watchdog for us, yeah.
So how would you stitch them? What would you do?
With a needle and thread, yeah. And a lot of times when the horses were ill, my father and I, we would mix up some kind of concoction in a bottle. I don't know what it was, and we'd get out there and pour it down the horse's throat. I don't know what it was for, but I remember just doing that. We were the doctors, so.
So So you mentioned a lot of animals. Did your family raise cattle at all?
Oh yes, yeah. Aberdeen Angus, and then the Herefords. The Herefords were for milking. They were a good milk cow, and the Aberdeen Angus, that's all black ones, they were for beef, for selling, for beef, yeah.
And how large was your family's herd?
Pardon me?
How large was your family's herd as far as the beef
Our,
cattle and the
how
dairy?
large? Not very large. I would say maybe about 100, maybe not even that. Those days you didn't have the fences like you have now. Your cattle were mostly in corrals, and then you let them loose, and that's what we had to do. We had to herd our cattle so they wouldn't get into the cornfields. That was a job in the summertime that my family and I, my sisters and I did.
Was that all on horseback? Or did
Yep,
you use
on
donkeys?
horseback, and we'd gallop through the prairie, and the horses would step into a badger hole. We'd fall off. We never had any broken bones. And then my father bought a harmonica, and he said, I want you to play the harmonica. So that's where I learned to play the harmonica, was herding cattle.
And did you self-taught?
Yes, oh yeah. And when we were in Germany, we went to the Hohner factory where they make the harmonicas, and I bought 11 harmonicas for the grandchildren. Yes, we had 11. We've got 16 now. And only one out of those 11 plays the harmonica.
Did you play well?
Well, yeah, I enjoy playing, yeah.
Now, you mentioned you had a brother who played the violin.
Yes.
Did all of your siblings play an instrument?
One of them did the guitar, and she sang, but just the brother and I were usually the ones. So. And there were no music lessons,
So it seems like your father was keen on the idea of you learning.
Yeah, he liked the music. He liked music. Now, I don't know whether that was in part of his family, because I don't know. I think the Russian German people, I think they like music. I think that's a lot of their entertainment, so I think.
Did you have a lot of aunts or uncles in the area?
Not really. I never got to know my aunts and uncles. Now, on Willie's side, my husband's side, Willie's side of the family, I knew more of his than, yeah.
What about school friends?
Yes. Still to this day, I still have some people that I went to school with. Most of them have passed away. Yeah. Yes, we had close school friends. Well, yeah, that was our entertainment, to get together, play checkers and games, and dress up just like the girls do these days, yeah. And we'd put on plays. We liked to put on plays. That was a fun thing to do.
Was that in school or outside?
No, out of school. We'd put on plays, yeah.
Who would you put them on for?
Well, just for our own benefits, or for our brothers and sisters, and maybe for our mother, we would do that in the summertime.
Now, what would that involve?
Well, one of them especially was we would take, do you know what a rhubarb plant is? You know what rhubarb is? It's the first thing that comes up in the spring. It's the long stick, and it's got this beautiful green foliage on. You don't know what rhubarb is? It's a tart fruit vegetable. That was the first thing that grows in the spring. I'm surprised you don't know what rhubarb is. Do you know what rhubarb is?
Maybe by a different name?
No, it's a plant that is supposed to be good for you. The first thing that you eat in the spring, the Indians use the thing, it cleans out your internal area. Yeah, it's a tart thing. But you put sugar on when you cook and you make pie. Well, we would take the big palm. They were huge, big palm, maybe about, 12 inches in diameter. Beautiful green palm. And we would pretend that, those were our palm trees and stuff. So, see, we had to make believe. We didn't have things. We had to make our own doll furniture and take the dolls, the pictures of the children and the ladies in the catalogs, in the Sears catalog, and put clothes on them. And so that's what we did. Yeah.
And how would you make your doll furniture? What would you make it
Out of cardboard, out of matchboxes, or just whatever we could, yeah. It was always something that we had to make, for our own entertainment. We had to make things, see.
Was that something you and your sisters would do?
Yep, and the brothers, yep.
What was your favorite toy growing up?
Really, we didn't have many toys. I hate to tell you. There were rag dolls that my mother made, with yarn and embroidered eyes on there. We had no toys. We were very poor.
Now, you grew up during the Depression. Can you describe that a little bit?
Well, yeah, the Depression was a time when, I'll tell you one incident. We had a cow that gave birth to a calf that was very sickly, and my father says, well, that'll never live. But he said, if you want to, you can see if you can get it well, and it'll be yours, Oh, I worked with that calf. I fed it, and I cleaned it, and I combed it, and worked on it, and it got to be a pretty good size. So my father says, okay, now we'll take it into the market and we'll sell it. So we did. I think I got either $18 or $20 for that calf. It was pretty nice, but it was mine. So we went to the bank. I opened a bank account, and the next day the bank closed. That was the saddest time of my life. I'd never earned any money like that before. So there was my money gone.
What did you do?
Cried. And so my father said, well, he said, I don't know how else you're going to earn money. I said, I know how. So I decided I would fix ladies' hair. And Saturdays, I'd get on my horse and I'd ride around to the different ladies, and I'd put pin curls in their hair and wave their hair. Sometimes on a good day, I would get a quarter. Usually it was 10 cents or something like that. But that's how I made money when I was young, maybe 10 or 12 years old. Yeah.
And that's when you started doing hair?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you enjoy it then?
Well, yeah. Now my daughter, Susan, was a hairdresser. She went to hairdressing school because I said, that's an artist. You have to do it. So she did very well. So she still does cut hair, but she's not a hairdresser anymore. So yeah. Yeah, during the Depression, it was also hot weather, very hot weather. It seemed like the sun just beat down. No rain, no nothing. The crops, of course, were failing. The grasshoppers were eating everything. And we had an old house that, of course, the windows were not airtight. And at night, my father would take a 5-gallon pail of water. He would nail burlap sacks against the window, and then he'd pour the water on that burlap sack to cool off and to keep the dust out of our bedrooms. So that was our air conditioning, and we were able to sleep. Otherwise, you couldn't breathe because the dust would come in. That's when they had the dust storms. And that continued until the farmers got to the point where they knew that the erosion came from plowing and burning their stubble and things, and they got a little educated, and then the crops began, the rains came, and the crops started again, and the Depression was over. But that was a bad time. That was a bad time. I remember that especially, that was one of my bad memories too, was that hot weather when you had to be inside the house at night to sleep. You couldn't open your windows, and the dust would come in. So, but wasn't that a good way to do that? Put some gunny sacks against the windows and...
How often would he do that?
Well, I think he would, it seemed like he did that for a couple of weeks or so, whenever it was so bad. So, yep.
Must have been an interesting experience.
Yeah, I do remember that especially, yeah. I don't know how he ever learned how to do that, but necessity, I guess, is the mother of invention, It was a necessary thing to do. Yeah, so.
We touched on religion just a little bit earlier. How important was religion during your childhood?
Oh, that was very important. Everyone was baptized in our family. As a matter of fact, when the little brothers died, they died in infancy. They were baptized before they passed away. I was 12 years old, and I hadn't been baptized. For some reason or other, I just wasn't baptized, and I begged to be baptized because I was afraid if I died, I wouldn't go to heaven, at that age. And the minister said, no, he said, wait until you go to confirmation, he says, and then you can be baptized. I can't imagine him saying that when he was baptizing the little ones. Why didn't he baptize me? So, yeah, religion has been, both my husband and I, we both grew up in the Lutheran church, and all the children have gone to private schools, Lutheran high schools, and some to colleges. And
now, how often did your family attend church?
Not too often, because, we lived on the farm, so in the wintertime it was hard to get there. Not too often. But when they did go, I remember the nice, see, the men sat on one side, the ladies sat on the other, and my mother was illiterate. She couldn't read or write, but she could sing those songs like she knew them by heart when they'd start playing the organ, and yeah. So isn't that interesting? Yeah. So that's where I met my husband, was in church. The minister one day had a gathering of the youth. It was called the Walter League, and it was in the country. And there were about 7 or 8 young kids who were going. And of course he invited Willie to go. And then we got in the car and I was invited. There was no place for me to sit, but this minister had it arranged that I should sit on Willie's lap. So I did. And then he didn't know what to do with his hands, he said he kept his hands down. It was funny. So anyway, that's how we got to know each other. Yeah.
How old were you both?
Oh, maybe 16 or 17 probably, yeah. Then, of course, he'd come out to the farm, and with his electrical, he did go to Coyne Electrical School. My father thought it was wonderful because he brought out a radio, and he hooked that up, and I don't know what. Anyway, they just thought he was great because he knew all this about electricity. So, yeah. So my father thought that was a good catch, So we got married. And nobody knew that we were getting married that Sunday. So the minister said, "We're having a wedding today. You're all invited." Well, nobody left. They all stayed. And so then we got married. And then my mother had someone bake an angel food cake. And she had chicken and she has sweet peas and mashed potatoes and fried chicken and angel food cake. And so there were maybe about 15 of us that got into my mother and dad's house. Then after that, we lived in a little trailer house, and then we decided to go on our honeymoon. We sold the trailer house and we left. I'd never been out of the state of North Dakota. I was, 18 or 19, 18. And I had no idea what mountains were, so one night we stopped in Wyoming, and the next morning I got up and we were in an area where there's mountains. That was most wonderful. Then we got to California at the height of some high traffic. We had no idea. But in 1940, there wasn't a lot of people out there, but there still was more traffic we had ever seen. And so we finally got to our sister-in-law's house. She lived out there, his sister. And then McDonnell Douglas was hiring because the war had started then. No, the war hadn't started then yet, but the war did start. And then they asked people to come in for interview, and he went in right away and got a job. 50 cents an hour. That was 1940. 50 cents an hour, But we had money to spare, it seemed like, yeah.
So was that trip part of your honeymoon?
Yeah, we went to Yellowstone National Park. And it was the winter time, and it was gorgeous. I'd never been. And then, of course, seeing the sign Hollywood, I thought, oh, this is glamorous. But Hollywood was not what I thought it would be.
What did you expect?
Well, I expected to see the stars walking down the street or something. I don't know. I expected more, and I was very disappointed. All I thought was nice was the sign that said Hollywood as you got into the area. But we saw lots of movie stars on the beaches, so. Yeah.
Did you ever speak to any of them?
Yeah, I asked a couple of them why they were wearing hats, and she told me, to protect their skin. Yeah. But I can't remember who they were, but I knew they were movie stars, yeah.
Will you tell me a little bit more about your wedding? Maybe what you wore and what you wore?
Well, my husband, we went to the dime store and we got a wedding ring, because he didn't have much money. Neither did I. And then I went to a store, and I didn't have a gown, a white gown. I had a blue chiffon dress with white gloves and a white hat and white shoes. Yeah. That's all I had.
And how many people were you with?
Well, there were maybe about, I would say, 30 people that had come to church that morning, but no one knew we were getting married except my mother and dad and Willie's mother and his sisters and brothers.
Now, can you explain more about the reception? Was it traditional German from Russia reception?
It was a reception at my mother's and dad's house. Just the general food is all we had. And, you know, the country fried chicken, mashed potatoes, peas from the garden. And I'm sure there was cucumber salad. I'm pretty sure there was, and probably the other salad made with sour cream and onions and vinegar, which is the tradition that they had in the summertime. Then after that, we went in. Willie had a little homemade motor home we pulled with the car. We went on our honeymoon. We went out in the country. I don't know how far we went. That's where we went. And then after that, we went out to California. In a couple of weeks, we went to California. But we didn't go in our little motor home. It was a small little motor home.
And how long did you live there? Short amount of time?
Pardon me, in California?
No, in your motor home.
Oh, maybe about 3 months. Maybe about 3 months, yeah. About 3 months. We're married in June. And then we went out to the country. He worked for a family out in the country. And I helped take care of some of the children there. And then just before Christmas, maybe in first part of December, we took off for California. So, yeah.
Did you have any idea that you wouldn't be back?
I love California so much that I didn't get homesick, but we come back. Every year we came back to visit my mother and father. And we did this with all the 5 children. You know, we had 5 children, and we came back every year to visit. No, I wasn't homesick because there's so many things to see and do in California. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else regarding wedding traditions that you would?
No, not really. No, this wasn't really a typical wedding. We had no dance, and we had no music, and we had no white clothes or anything. And so, I mean, it was just...
How long was your courtship?
Oh, let me see. I went to high school in Jamestown. Maybe a year. Probably a year. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Going to transition here a little bit to some historical events.
Pardon me?
To some historical events. We'll just talk about some historical
Oh,
events.
yeah. What would we say about historical events? Like for instance, what?
Well, World War II. Can you tell us how maybe the outbreak of World War II
Oh,
changed?
you know, that was really awful because we were in California and we heard this noise like firecrackers going, and we rushed outside, and here they had bombed Pearl Harbor. But we couldn't see the bombing from Santa Monica, California, but we could see our planes up in the sky, you know, going. And that was really scary. And then after that, of course, we had the blackouts. There had to be black shades on the windows, and we couldn't drive with our car lights on at time. One time we were in church, I think it was on Good Friday, and the sirens were blowing, and we had to drive home in the dark. Because when the sirens started blowing, that means, you know, and everything was black, pitch black. You know, we could do that in 1940-41 because there wasn't that much traffic, but you can imagine now what would happen. Yeah. So there had to be black shades on. Yeah, that was probably the big historical event. Then, of course, McDonnell Douglas really speeded up their plane production, and a lot of people were asked if they had relatives or friends that would like to come to work for. And when they got anyone from North Dakota or South Dakota or Nebraska, boy, the supervisors were so pleased because they knew they'd be good workers, you know. So,
why is that?
well, why is that? Well, because they were not lazy, and they were used to work and taking orders. were probably some of the younger kids maybe were living in LA at that point in time, were probably like spoiled little brats like they are now, you know. I think that's why they were so happy to get farm people. I know that's what my husband said. They just were just so grateful. They were good workers.
Can you maybe talk about the difference between kids that were raised on a farm and the kids you saw in town?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The kids in town at that point in time, I thought, had cars. They had good, better clothes, and we rode horseback when we had to go someplace. We didn't have any cars. And I think that hard work, I think, build character. I mean, I think we were more interested in helping our parents and not demanding so much. I think so. I really do. Because that's how we were brought up. We didn't have the luxuries. I didn't know what it was to have like canned fruit cocktail or something till I got to California. I had no idea. We had none of those things, see? So all we had was homemade rhubarb jam and jelly and sauce, you know.
What was it like moving from farm-raised food to canned food in the city?
Not very good, except, of course, we were living in Santa Monica area, and there were the Japanese people at that point in time, before they whisked them away, had large gardens, and so there was fresh vegetables and fresh fruits year-round, and that I still miss the fresh fruits and vegetables. So, I mean, we didn't have to have any canned things. It was always going to the market almost every day, you know, walking to the market and then bringing home your fresh vegetables and fruits, which I really enjoyed, yeah.
How often would you do that?
Well, I would market maybe once or twice a week or 3 times a week. I would take the children, and on Thursday usually was an outing for when the kids were little. We would go up to Wilshire Boulevard. That was maybe about 4 or 5 blocks, and I would market then and bring them home in the wagon. So, yeah, little red wagon.
And we talked a little bit about Pearl Harbor. Can you remember where you were when the attack?
Yes, I was in Santa Monica, and I think it was almost maybe bedtime for John. John is, our oldest son is 69. And we took him outside because it was like firecrackers, you know, going off. And I don't know whether our airplanes were shooting or anything. We would see a lot of lights, you know, coming out of the airplane. And it was a loud noise, yeah. It was very scary. And then, of course, after that, we couldn't buy any nylons. We couldn't buy any butter. We had to have margarine. And the food situation then was getting to the point where you had to be very careful when you were allowed to get coupons. You would get the coupons, and if you used those up, that was it. You couldn't buy butter or anything.
How did that change your market habits?
I don't think it changed that much. We still would go out to the valley where they raised apricots. They had big groves of apricots, and we would pick our apricots, and then we'd come home, and then Willie and I, we would make sauce. Sometimes I made as many as 50 quarts of apricot sauce. Because the apricots for $1 for a big pail, you could get them for $1. You know, and they were picked right off of the tree, and the oranges right off the tree too. See, but a lot of that changed because the real estate people got in and they bought up those fruit area acres and built houses, and people came, you know, to work in the factories. And it changed. The war changed things. It really did. Yeah.
Now, was anyone in your family ever drafted?
No. Our son did go into the reserves, the Army Reserve. And one time when they had the Watts riots, that was John, Watts riots in L.A. And if you remember the Watts riots, you remember that? Oh, gangs, black people and Mexicans, and it was they were asked to go to the scene in East Los Angeles. And he said that was scary. That was the only time none of the other families were in, no. But I had relatives that were killed, of course, during the war.
How about the Vietnam War? How did the outbreak of the Vietnam War affect your family?
Our son-in-law went. He was married to our daughter. Dale was married to Susan, and he went to the service. And he said that was a bad war. And he had the job, I probably shouldn't say that, but he had the job of taking the injured and the dead back. Now that was a very bad. And then after he got out of the service, it's hard. We don't realize how hard it is on these service people to adjust. The Blue Angels were flying overhead in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and he had a flashback. He thought he was back in Vietnam. And he says, I dropped to the ground. He said, that's what they were supposed to do. So that must be an awful feeling for some of our people who are coming back from Iran and Iraq. There are things that they've experienced that it's just not. There'll be a lot of bad things happening, I think, to these young men. That's just one incident that I know of, where they get flashbacks, these people, and we don't even realize what's going on. So.
Certainly isn't easy.
Yeah. That was the only experience I ever had anyone being in Vietnam. That was our son-in-law. His mother would send sausage over there, and he said some of the sausage would have mold on it, but he said we didn't care. We just wiped it off and ate it anyway. Well, that sausage had so much preservative in it anyway. So, yeah, that reminds me that maybe we should do more for our service people, send things over, letters and stuff.
A lot has changed.
Yes, yeah, they appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yep, right.
Since World War II.
That's right. Oh, yes. I mean, they have email now. They can email their families, and they can see them on the TV, and so it's different. It's different.
A lot different than when you grew up.
Yep, of course.
I know this is going to be an interesting transition, but I'm curious a little bit, because when you talk about when you met your husband and such, what kind of youth activities or dating rituals were common when you were younger?
Well, probably roller skating and going to a movie. My husband didn't believe in dancing. He was brought up and very strict. There would be no dancing. Fishing, and just outings, maybe horseback riding or just having fishing, yeah. Yeah, that was it. Oh, the drive-in theaters, too. We had drive-in theaters, which were nice. We used to take our children along. We'd pile them in the car in Santa Monica, and we'd go to the drive-in, And they could play on the swings until it got dark, and then they'd fall asleep, and we'd go home and put them to bed. They'd be all sleeping, So that was a cheap entertainment.
What was the first time you'd ever been to a drive-in?
Well, I think in California, first time, I think maybe our son was maybe about a year and a half old when we went to a drive-in, which was really fun. I don't even know if they have them anymore, do they? Yeah, I think they do. Do they? Really?
Now, you said you went to the movies, of course. What type of movies did you see?
I tell you what, certainly if we got married, my husband had what do you call these things that show the movies? What do you call those things a projector. He had a projector. And he would rent movies, and one of them was a Western called, oh gosh, the girls would know. Usually Westerns. Yeah. So we would show those in towns that didn't have a theater, see? And then the kids would come and they would want to buy tickets, or they'd bring cream and they'd bring strawberries, and then we'd give them a free ticket. And so that was kind of interesting. We did that for a couple months, so in the summertime, yeah. We showed movies.
Mostly Westerns then?
Yeah, they were Western. Weren't all Westerns, of course. They were short, and they were fun little things, too. Little fun, maybe fun cartoons. But that was cute, though. We did that, yeah.
And how old were you when you started dating?
maybe 17, 16 or 17. I'd say 17.
That's about the time you met
Yeah,
Lily.
yeah. No, we were not allowed. We were not allowed to go to visit anyone or dance with anyone unless they were Protestant. We could, Catholic was a no-no. Isn't that something now? How times have changed, huh? Oh gosh.
Can you describe a typical date that you would?
Oh, at what age?
Um, 17 on.
Oh, well, I think at about 17, I don't think I had to go out and do any chores. I think the boys were doing it. Let's say on a Sunday morning. Yeah, we just get ready to go to church and come home and have dinner and then maybe go visiting. Maybe we'd go horseback riding, which was always fun to meet some of the neighbors and go horseback riding. Or maybe if anyone had a car, we'd go out in the country or we'd get together and play baseball. Yeah, that was typical. Yeah. We had no TV. We'd listen to a radio if we could,
Well, did you ever listen to any radio programs?
Yes, Willie brought a radio out when he was dating me, and my father thought that was the most wonderful thing.
What kind of programs would you listen to?
Oh, my father used to like to listen to the speeches that Hitler gave. We had to be very quiet. And then he would like to listen to Joe Louis, and who was the other boxer? Usually sports. And there were some soap operas, but I don't remember too much about the soap operas. And there was always Western music, yeah. Nothing, no contemporary, no opera or anything like that. It was always Western music. That was the trend in those days. That's what we listened to, yeah.
How often would you get together and listen to radio?
Well, maybe just at night, occasionally at night, yeah. Not too often. During the day, we were always busy. There were only things to do. In the wintertime, you went to school. Summertime, you had a lot of work to do, yeah. You didn't sit around and watch or listen to the radio.
To move again.
All right.
I know we touched a little bit on Christmas and the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about holidays.
Mm-hmm.
What was your favorite holiday?
I think it was Christmas, yeah.
Can you describe why?
Well, we always had a Christmas program, the school did. And then we would have a Christmas tree. We never had one at our house. And the families, the children's parents would come, and we'd have a program. And then after that, Santa Claus would come, and he'd have gifts. He'd have gifts for everyone. And that was always fun, because I don't know who supplied the gifts, maybe the school board, but it was always a little something. So that was at Christmas time, yeah.
Do you remember any of those gifts?
Pardon me?
Do you remember what those gifts were?
Maybe little pins, or maybe a slate, or maybe books, usually books. Books were always nice, storybooks, yeah, things like that. And then everyone would get a bag that had nuts and candies and things in. That was a tradition too, yeah. Another thing we had in school was called basket socials. You would make up a basket, you'd make up a box to look like an elaborate basket, and you had to bake something to put it in there and have maybe a hot dish or maybe a sandwich or something, and then it would go up for auction. It'd go up for bid. It was called, yeah. And we were always hoping that, gosh, some old man wouldn't get then we had to eat whoever bought our basket, Eventually, certainly most of the time, we'd end up by some old farmer or some bachelor, but we had to sit with him and eat the food that was in there because we had prepared it, see? And I don't know, the money must have gone to the school board or something. But that was a fun thing. They would bid on these baskets. They're called lunch basket. Some would go as high as $1. Some would go $10. All depend upon how rich the farmer was or whoever. If they knew who brought the basket, sometimes they would know and they'd want to eat with that person. Then they'd really bid high. So there's a little politics, I guess, involved in that. It was fun. Yeah.
How often would they
Well,
do
we had basket social a couple times during the year. Yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. They were called basket socials.
Did you wear maybe your best dress on
I
for
suppose
that?
we did. I suppose. I don't remember. We only each had one Sunday dress that we wore to church every Sunday. Otherwise, it was the regular clothes we wore for school, you know. But we always would have one dress reserved for Sundays.
What did yours look like?
Yeah. It was probably homemade. I don't know, or maybe a hand-me-down. I don't remember. I don't remember what they were, but I don't remember. Probably a gingham dress. I don't know.
Do you remember what your mother would wear?
She would wear something that she had made, a little gingham dress, you know, and always a hat. Everyone wore hats those days. Yeah.
That's pretty neat. Did your family, did they celebrate Easter?
Yes.
How would they celebrate?
Well, we would dye eggs, and a lot of times we would get baby chicks in sometimes from the hatcheries that, you know, there was baby chicks would come in about that time. Yeah, that's all we do. And then we'd have a dinner and go to church. Yeah. And usually then we would wear hats. We'd always probably manage to have a hat or maybe a new flower or something on the hat or ribbons or something. Yeah, we would dress up for Easter. Mm-hmm.
Now, what kind of dinner? Did you have a specific dinner that
Just
you made?
just the regular. Usually it was meat and potatoes, and the family tradition was, when there's a holiday, was pineapple and rice with whipped cream. We still have to have that at our dinners because that was a family tradition. It's
How
cooked.
did you make that?
Well, you cook your pineapple, you cook your rice, and then you get your crushed pineapple, and you add it to the rice. You drain it a little bit, and then you put in some maraschino cherries or whatever you want to, and lots of whipped cream. And it's sort of like a dessert, or you can have it as a main course too. But pineapple and rice was always, we still have to have that holidays. That's a tradition. Even my girls do that now. Yeah, it's kind of like a tradition. So.
Yeah, we already talked about the 4th of July a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of just go past that.
Sure, Kate.
Did your family celebrate birthdays at all?
Not really. No, we didn't.
How about, well, I guess you've been having one too. What about sausage parties or communal butchering? We talked a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, that would be the communities. The families would get together to help with the butchering, you know. And then after the butchering was done, everything was brought in the house and it was cut up in sections, you know, and frozen. Not frozen. It was canned. My mother would can the next day, and the fat was all rendered out. And then that was called lard, and that was put in jars, and that was used for baking and for cooking. Then we'd make sausage. That was fun, but you had to clean those intestines first, though, which was a big job. You had to have a dull knife, and you had to scrape those things, and then you had to blow into them and wash them. And if no air was in them, then they were good. You know, they were like a balloon. But yeah, that's what they used. The real intestines, no plastic stuff. And my father always had a joke, and we always fell for it. He'd make sausage, and then he'd say in German, "Jetzt müssen wir das anmessen." That means, we've got to measure this sausage. And of course, we stood around, and we fell for that every year. And we'd come up to him, and how do you do that? And he'd just take the sausage and kind of go around us, put it around our neck and on our face, and then he would laugh. And you know, it took us years before we caught on that he would do this, but that was the thing he always did. Measuring the sausage, and we thought, well, that is funny. Yeah, then he'd always say, "I've got the squeal of the pig in my pocket." And when we were little, we thought, how could he have the squeal of the pig? When they stabbed those pigs to kill them or shoot them, the pigs would squeal, and you could hear that in the house. Oh, we hated that. We just hated that. We just knew the pig was dead, you know. But he always said he had the squeal in his pocket. So in a way, he was kind of funny, you know. He entertained us, really, he did, yeah. Until we got old enough to know better. But the sausage was always so good. Then they made head cheese, which I always thought was horrible. They take the head of the sheep or the animal, they take the fur off of it, take out the inside, the brains and stuff. Then the whole head would be put in a big container, and that would be boiled. And then that meat would be taken off of there and ground up, and that was called head cheese. It had a different kind of a texture than any other kind of meat. We never liked it. We never liked head cheese. And there was liver sausage they'd make. And then a lot of people would make blood sausage. They would catch the blood when they would kill the animal and add that to the sausage. That would make the sausage a nice color, but I could never, if it was blood sausage, we would never eat it. I think my father was the only one that would eat it. Yeah.
And that was traditional.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was something that he grew up with probably in the old country, because I don't think anyone does that anymore. There are people who make sausage, but I'm sure they don't use blood sausage. Yeah. Then liver sausage was good. The livers were always cooked, fried, and put in quart jars, and then they were canned in jars, and then that's what we had on sandwiches when we went to school. Was almost like pate. It was almost like a pate, with liver. Yeah, so we really ate fancy. I mean, liver sausage sandwiches, And I'd love one right now. Yeah, it was like a pate, see? It was ground up liver. So, did you ever make pate?
I've had it.
You've had it, yeah.
Well, did your family ever celebrate New Year's or anything like
No,
that?
nothing
Thanksgiving?
special. No, nothing special that I remember. Except, of course, I always had to have the house nice and clean because my mother would say the tradition is if you have your house nice and clean and everything done, it's going to be that way all year round. And we would make resolutions like kids, but I never think that we kept them. I don't think so. Who keeps resolutions? Nobody.
What was your most stressful childhood experience?
Dreadful?
Stressful.
Well, I think it was the time that my brother says, "Come with me, we're going to go on the header box." That was a big box that's set on wheels, it's called a header box. And he said, "We're going to go do something, pick up some bundles or something." So I said, okay, I think I must have been about 6 or 7 years old. So I got on the wagon, and he said, "Oh, I have to get something, and I'll tie the reins around here." There's a little stick that you would tie the reins, and that would mean that the horses would, stand still. But something happened to those horses, and they shied and they got scared. I think there was a piece of paper or something that flew out, and they didn't have the blinders on, and they took off. And I was on that hay rack, too young. I tried to get over there and pull the reins to stop them, and I couldn't. And they ran, and finally they went into a section line that meant this man had the property here, and this man had the property here, and there was just like a little area, and they went into that area and got caught on one of the poles, and the hay rack tipped over, and the horses ran home, and I was underneath the hay rack, see? And of course, when the horses ran home, my mother knew there was something wrong, so they looked for me, and then they found me, and I was pretty badly hurt underneath there.
What had happened?
I think my shoulder, I still almost feel that. I think my shoulder was out of place, from being thrown when the hay rack tipped over, yeah.
How old were you?
Oh, I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. I was so young that I couldn't reach the reins. I couldn't go and stop the horses, but I was going to, see. That was probably the most stressful time in my life, yeah, really.
Well, in contrast, what is your happiest childhood memory?
Oh, I think Christmas was really fun. Christmas and summer times when we could get out, no school. And if work was done, we could play. Yeah, I think in the summertime.
Did you ever do summer school or anything like that?
No, there wasn't such. I can't remember anyone going to summer school. No.
What was the most adventurous thing you did during your childhood?
Before I got married? I can't think of anything. maybe going with my brothers skating, ice skating, and then they would say, "Oh, the ice is perfect for walking across. It's rubber." He says, "And who will go?" "Laura, you go." So of course I was so gullible, and I'd say I would. You'd walk across that ice, and it was like a rubber. If you stopped, you went down. So, yeah, that's the whole idea. The one to get across that the fastest was the winner, say. So, of course, I always had to test it. I was pretty gullible, I guess. Get halfway across, the ice would break through, and I would be, it was just a shallow little, it wasn't, I'd be sopping wet, and run to the house crying, and my mother would say, "I told you, keep away from your brothers, you're so gullible," she'd say. I have to take off my clothes and stand by the stove with a blanket until she dried my clothes, or got me some extra clothes. I remember standing there by that stove, just with a blanket on me. But I soon learned not to do those things. "Oh, jump off of the windmill here onto the hay rack. You're so good at that, I was sort of like the tester, If I could do it, then they do it, Oh, I was gullible. Really bad.
Well, what other kinds of things would they rope you into doing?
Well, when the folks would be gone, they'd get the bulls really angry. They'd get red cloth. We'd have to go get something red, and sit on the fence, and then we'd have to clap our hands, and get the attention of the bulls. And, like a bullfight. I don't know how we knew anything. And then the boys would be out there with this red stuff and getting the bulls so angry, Yeah, wasn't that some kind of adventure? My mother and Dad never knew we did that, so. But you had to have a little excitement. That was excitement for them, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
They needed you.
Oh, yeah. They needed us to sit on the fence and cheer. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else about your childhood memories that you would like to add?
No. It was happy. There were times that were sad, especially when our 3 brothers all passed away with diphtheria. That was a sad time. Yeah. Well, they were young. When the diphtheria, I don't know what year that was. It was a diphtheria epidemic, and so many people died, and we lost 3 brothers to that. No, I say 2 brothers because the one little boy was born ill. He died. He was born in October, then he died in November. So, but the other 2 brothers had diphtheria. So,
what were their names?
Henry and Sam. Sam was 15, and Henry was only 9.
And the little one?
Yeah, the little one died in a month old. We don't know what happened. He had sores in his mouth. Then in those days, the bodies were put into the granary or in an area until the funeral. There wasn't a funeral home, and they were frozen then. Where they were homemade caskets and put in the. And we were not allowed to go out there to the granary because diphtheria was very, very contagious. We had to be quarantined. And my sister and I, we snuck out there to look at our brother. I remember that. Oh my, we were scolded. We didn't get diphtheria, but just a few got it. But I think it was pretty contagious. Yeah, that was a sad time for my mother. In 3 months, they lost 3 children. Yeah, that was a sad time.
How did they do the funeral at the same time for the 2 that passed?
I don't remember much about the funeral. I was so young. You know what I remember most of all? Mrs. Ruffsloff, our neighbor, bless her heart, she came with a big bolt of material. I can still see that. And she made dresses for all of us to go to the funeral. But if you want to ask me about the funeral, I can't remember anything except the clothes she made for us. Can you believe that? I couldn't have been very old. I think maybe 5 years old or something like that. 5 or 6, yeah. No, I probably was older than that because I used to rock Gerald to sleep and Marion would rock Gertie. I think I was 8, yeah. I don't remember the funeral. It was in the wintertime. We probably didn't even go very far. I don't know. I don't remember funerals. Maybe I've just blocked it out. I don't know.
Are they buried in your hometown then?
Yeah, they were buried in Kintyre. Yeah, there's 3 of them there in Kintyre. Yeah.
And your other siblings?
Pardon me?
What?
Yeah, and then there was one brother that was killed by a car. And then
Which brother?
That would have been George. That was George, yeah. He was only 23 years old.
So you were just talking about George and the car accident.
Yeah, that was so sad. Well, he was mowing weeds along the road, you know how they do in the summertime. And this car came over, and George was in the process of turning around to go back up the hill. And as he turned, this car came too fast and hit the back end of where he was sitting, you know, his mower, and it tossed him about 30 feet. And of course, he got a concussion and he died. And then the horses come running home, and my mother just says, oh, she says, I just knew something bad had happened. She seemed to sense these things, so they went out to looking, and they found him, yeah. Yeah, that was so sad. That was so sad.
And what about your other brothers, your sister?
Oh, there's Sam, and then there's George. And then my brother Golf came from Arizona, and he stopped at his son-in-law's house, who's a heart specialist, and they played cards, and at 12 o'clock he went to bed and had a massive heart attack. Died right in the doctor's home, so, yeah. And then the rest of the family, I think they've all had natural causes of death, yeah.
What about your parents? Where are they buried?
They're buried out here at the Napoleon Cemetery.
What did your father pass away from?
My father passed away. What did he die from? He was spraying. He had asthma, and he was spraying the garden with Paris green. I don't know if you know what it is. That's outlawed now. And I think the wind was blowing, and I think he inhaled some of that, and he had asthma, and they said he died of it. Then he ended up in the hospital, but there was no autopsy, but we still think it was the asthma and the poison from the Paris green, you know, that caused the heart attack. Yeah. And shortly after that, my mother passed away, and she had a heart attack too.
How old were they?
My dad was 81, and my mother was, I think, 79. Yeah.
To some reflections here. Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Why do you think? Well, you know, our children don't believe some of these things that happen to us because we were brought up in a different kind of world than they are. Now, my son-in-law does not believe that we didn't have indoor. He was raised in New Orleans with, his family was pretty well-to-do, I guess. He doesn't believe that we didn't have an indoor toilet in the wintertime. He says, well, where'd you go? I said, well, we had slop pails, which we used. Then I said, if we felt like it, we'd go out to the barn where it was nice and warm. I can't believe that. See, they don't believe these things, and they don't believe how we lived, and how we grew up and were self-sufficient and things like that. So I think it's good for them to know these things because this is a different generation than when they are now living. I don't think our generation, say our great-grandchildren, if a tragedy should happen, I don't think they could survive because they're not as strong as we are. I think they've been not brought up as strong character. They have good characters, but they're not as strong as we are because we had to help out, and we had to be satisfied with hand-me-down clothes and things like that because that was the way of life, see? So we weren't spoiled like some of the newer generations are spoiled. It's a different generation. Well, you know yourself. So I think that's important for them to know how hard, I appreciate my father and mother, whatever they did for us, because that was a struggle to raise us, and we were all healthy and normal, had good food, so I think it's a good idea for the families to know what we went through.
Helps them understand you.
Yeah, it helps them understand us, and we are different than they are. We're saving, and so, okay.
Well, are there any other thoughts or observations you would like to share?
Concerning what?
Concerning telling your history or
Oh,
about your childhood. Or...
yeah. I probably left out a lot of things maybe that I probably should have told, but no, all in all, I think, I think we all had a good bringing up. We had companionship and we had good food, and our parents were strict, but they built character in us. I think they did, yeah. And now, of course, I appreciate everything I have. I appreciate it very, very much, because if my father could look down from heaven and see what we're doing now, he'd be amazed that we can turn on the TV and the internet and speak to our grandchildren and listen and see them. We can talk to them. He would be surprised. Yeah, I really think so. Yeah. So, yeah, well, I appreciate living in this day and age. I really do. Yeah, very much. I think we are living in a very good age. Mm-hmm.